Hamas cannot be defeated. We're not saying this, the Israeli military is. This is a statement made by the spokesperson of the Israeli army. Almost unbelievable that an army should make such an assessment about its enemy after months of intense war, a punishing war, particularly when it is made by the Israeli army. Yet, that's exactly what IDF spokesperson has said. The Prime Minister of the country, Benjamin Netanyahu, who has based his whole strategy on the complete defeat of Hamas, who insists that he won't stop until Hamas is defeated. His opponents have now begun to whisper that he took that position in order to ensure that he remains Prime Minister, since he is most unlikely to be replaced while the war continues. After all, political change can only take place during a long ceasefire. It's safe to say then, Israel's military leadership and Israel's Prime Minister don't see eye to eye. A rift that has increasingly spilled out into the open. Of course, the Israeli military was quick to issue a clarification, but for the rest of us around the world, it raised a big question. If Israeli army feels Hamas cannot be defeated, then what is it doing in Gaza? The war is in its 9th month. What does Israel plan to do next? After more than 8 months into the war in Gaza, sparked by Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel, the country has failed to crush Hamas from Gaza. That was Netanyahu's big promise before declaring war in Gaza, to eliminate the Islamist group from the Palestinian enclave. That, and to safely bring back Israeli citizens taken hostage by Hamas. Yet, 9 months into the war, Israel's war against Hamas has only brought widespread devastation. Now, after all these months, Israel's top army spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, says that Hamas cannot be eliminated. Speaking to Israel's Channel 13 broadcaster, Hagari said, I'm quoting here, "This business of destroying Hamas, making Hamas disappear, it's simply throwing sand in the eyes of the public." To put it simply, Hagari said that the idea that Israel can destroy Hamas or make Hamas disappear is misleading the public. His comment is a rare, direct rebuke from the Israeli military of how Prime Minister Netanyahu has delineated the main aim of the war in Gaza, which he says is total victory over Hamas and returning Israeli hostages. Remember, on multiple occasions, the Israeli Prime Minister has said that only the eradication of Hamas can bring an end to the war. He has rejected series of proposals for possible alternatives to Hamas. He has rejected America's plan to bring in the Palestinian Authority. He has rejected Arab calls for a Palestinian unity government. It's for these reasons that military analysts as well as former Israeli officials have questioned whether installing a new government in Gaza was ever possible. Ironically, Netanyahu may have helped Hamas survive. For in any political settlement backed by Egypt, Qatar, the UAE, Hamas might have had to make way for a different government in Gaza. Now, Hamas has survived the Israeli military's most brutal assaults, but Israeli politics has not paused. And the Israeli street is aware that there must be change in its leadership if the region is to see a glimmer of peace again. There's so little faith in Netanyahu that even those who propped him up at a time when the country was in a state of emergency have been forced to resign. I'm talking about Benny Gantz and Gary Eisenkot, who quit Netanyahu's small war cabinet earlier this month amid disagreements over the direction of the war in Gaza. After the two key members resigned, Netanyahu was then forced to dissolve the war cabinet. But let's stay on the topic of discontent over the direction of the war. Last month, Netanyahu insisted once again that there will be no permanent ceasefire in Gaza until Hamas's military and governing capabilities are destroyed and all hostages are released. And that was after US President Joe Biden announced to the world that Israel had proposed a 3-stage plan to Hamas aimed at reaching a permanent ceasefire. Meanwhile, in Gaza, 8 months into the war, there has been no sign of let-up in the fighting. Efforts by international mediators backed by the United States have so far failed to persuade Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire. In the midst of all this, The widening rift between the military leadership and Netanyahu surely does not bode well. Remember, Netanyahu is increasingly facing pressure from the Biden administration to accept a ceasefire proposal. President Biden says that it will lead to an end to the war. But this week, Netanyahu opened a new dispute with the administration, accusing Washington of withholding weapons and ammunition from Israel. The White House dismissed the claims, saying it paused only one shipment of bombs over concerns about the potential killing of civilians in Israel's operation in the city of Rafah in southern Gaza. Now take a look at these pictures on your screens right now. That's what Gaza looks like today. A picture of complete devastation and death. Just today, Israeli military carried out a series of deadly strikes in central Gaza. In western Rafah, Israeli tanks have pushed deeper, firing shells at displaced people's tents. As of today, over 37,000 Palestinians have been killed and over 85,000 Palestinians have been wounded in Israeli military attacks on Gaza since the 7th of October. In just the past 24 hours, 35 Palestinians have been killed and 130 have been wounded, according to the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza. Meanwhile, on the other side of the border in Israel, anti-government protesters, including relatives of captives, blocked major highways. Israelis are calling to oust the Prime Minister. The pressure is building on Netanyahu. You see, the world knows what apparently the Israeli Prime Minister refuses to see. Of course, Hamas is responsible for committing crimes on the 7th of October, but the horrors for which Hamas must be held accountable do not minimize the culpability of Netanyahu and the yes-men he surrounds himself with. We know now for sure that IDF knew of Hamas's plan to kidnap 250 Israelis before the 7th of October attack. A newly surfaced document has revealed that IDF and intelligence systems had detailed knowledge of Hamas's plan. Some 3 weeks prior to the attack, Israel knew what was on the horizon, yet nothing was done to stop it. In light of this information becoming public, isn't the only appropriate thing for Netanyahu to do is to resign? But there seems to be no remorse. In fact, in response to the IDF spokesperson's admission that Hamas cannot be defeated, the Prime Minister's office has pushed back. Netanyahu's office reiterated that the destruction of Hamas is the major goal of the war, a goal that the IDF is committed to. But the contradictory statements, yet another example of mounting tensions between the Israeli military and the Prime Minister. It's clear that Netanyahu's refusal to see the truth is stymieing peace efforts in Gaza. Now, even the Israeli military is admitting openly that Hamas cannot be defeated. What is then Netanyahu waiting for? How long does he plan to drag the war? How long till he comes to the realization that his efforts to prolong his grasp on power is just a futile exercise? For latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.